young man in Australia has finished college and he's acquired his first real professional job. And for this job, he had to move to the city of Melbourne, which is one of the largest cities in Australia. He was able to find an apartment in a pretty nice neighborhood. The apartment was by no means a luxury apartment, but it was good enough for his purposes. It was in a building that had been constructed in the 1930s, and he was up on the top floor. And even though it wasn't a palace, he was very excited to have a place to call his own. He had never really lived on his own before. All through college, he lived in the dorms and he had roommates. So this would be a great opportunity to really feel independent as he's starting his career. The first couple months go by with no issues. He's in a nice rhythm of going to work and coming home and relaxing and going out with friends. And he's loving his life that he has now with this new job and this new career in a new city. After a couple months, he comes home from work one day, just like he does every day. Usually one of the first things he would do when he got back to his apartment would be to use the restroom because he had a long commute on his way home. So he sits down his bag and he goes toward the back end of his apartment where the bathroom is. He opens the door, he flips on the light and sees something strange. On the floor of his bathroom is a large wooden board. And the board looked as though it had been split right down the middle. Something had cracked this board in half. And he's looking at this board and he realizes that this is not some flimsy piece of plywood. This board is about an inch thick. And so the force to crack this board in half must have been pretty significant. So he starts looking around his bathroom trying to figure out what's going on, and he looks up toward the ceiling and he sees that up on the ceiling there is this hole. It was not a very large hole, but it was certainly large enough for a full-grown man to crawl into and get up into his ceiling. And it's clear that this was also a hole that was carved into the ceiling. It's not something that happened because of a leak or something like that. He goes closer to inspect and he takes out his phone and he turns on his flashlight and he's looking up into the hole in his ceiling and he realizes that there's an attic up there. There's a whole nother room above his apartment. Now he's not about to go up there himself because it's a little bit creepy. But at the same time, alarm bells are not going off. He's not thinking that something strange is going on and he's not thinking that there's some sort of intruder. What he thinks happened is his landlord must have sent in a maintenance worker without telling him. The maintenance worker went up into the attic, they came back down, they did not secure the board properly, it crashed to the ground and split in half. And he starts crafting this text to his landlord, basically saying, hey, did you send a maintenance worker into my apartment? I get home and I see this board on the ground and there's a hole in the ceiling. You know, if you send a maintenance worker in, you have to give me 24 hours notice. That's something that was in our lease. Within a couple minutes, he gets a text back from his landlord that just says, please call me as soon as possible. So he gets on the phone and he calls his landlord and she tells him, so I did not send any maintenance worker into your apartment. However, the past two tenants that I've had who stayed in that unit that you're currently in had the same thing happen to them. So it's very curious to me that this happened because this seems to be a theme with this unit. But she still apologizes for the inconvenience and she promises that she'll get a maintenance worker out there as soon as possible to fix the board, which she does. The very next day, a maintenance guy comes in, he puts a new board on the hole, covering it up, and he thinks that's going to be the end of it, right? This was just a board that happened to fall off, revealing an attic space. Not a big deal. Until 1 month later. 1 month later, it's a weeknight. It's about 4 a.m. He is fast asleep in his bedroom, which is adjacent to the bathroom. And out of a dead sleep, he wakes up and just shoots up out of bed and begins looking around his room, thinking that something must have startled him awake because when he woke up, he was just covered in goosebumps and his adrenaline was pumping and his heart rate was up and he's sort of looking around the room in a panic. But he realizes that there's nothing out of place. No one's here. The room's still dark. Everything seems still. And he's sitting in the bed, just assuming he must have been having a dream that caused him to wake up so abruptly when he starts hearing a noise. And the noise that he starts hearing is clearly coming from up above him. Now remember, as I mentioned, the bedroom was adjacent to the bathroom. So the bathroom is right next to the bedroom. So it's clear that that attic probably extended over his bedroom. And his first thought when he hears this noise up above him is, oh great, I've got some kind of animal up in the attic that, this is just another thing that I'm going to have to deal with. But as he's listening to the noise, he's beginning to think that no animal, or at least no animal that would be in somebody's attic, would make the kind of noises that he's hearing. What he's hearing sounds, as he described it, like somebody dragging a sack of potatoes across the floor directly above him. It sounded like something heavy. Something heavy was being dragged across the floor from above him over toward where the hole in the bathroom was. Now he's beginning to feel some fear, because it's clear to him if this is not an animal, then the only other alternative could be that somebody is up in that attic. And last time, maybe the reason the board fell off was because they had been coming into my apartment. He's sitting in silence and just listening to this and trying to work up the courage to go over to the bathroom and just check and make sure that everything in there is okay. And after about 5 minutes, he works up the courage. He gets out of the bed. He grabs a cricket bat that he would keep next to his bed just as a weapon in case he needed it. And he starts slowly and silently creeping over toward the bathroom. He exits his bedroom, he gets to the door of the bathroom, and he flips on the light, and his heart just sinks. The new board that had been installed by the maintenance worker a month earlier is now on the ground, and it's in pieces. That must have been the thing that caused him to wake up so suddenly, was the sound of this board crashing to the ground. Now he's starting to feel some true fear. He's standing there in the doorway, cricket bat in hand, and just listening and not really sure what to do when he notices that those dragging sounds have now stopped. It's totally silent. But it's only silent for a few seconds. Because just as those dragging sounds have stopped, he starts to hear something else. Coming out of the hole in the bathroom, he starts to hear whispering. But the whispering didn't sound like it was coming from an adult. What he was hearing, and he's certain of this, what he was hearing was the sound of two children whispering to each other. Very intently, he's listening. Again, cricket bat at the ready for whatever happens. And he hears the same phrase repeated over and over by these voices. They just keep saying, "It's your turn. It's your turn. It's your turn." Now at this point, I'm not entirely sure why he doesn't just run out of the apartment, but he does not. He stays. And he flips on all of the lights in the apartment to try to get some sort of semblance of normalcy. And after the lights are flipped on, he sits on his couch and he turns on the TV and just sort of sits there and tries to feel normal. By this point, it's about 5 o'clock in the morning, and it's still dark outside, but he knows that the sun is going to come up fairly soon. And so I suppose he's just thinking, if I can just make it to when the sun is up, then everything's going to be okay. But then, very suddenly, only moments after he sat down, it was like a fuse blew, and all of the lights, all of the electronics in his apartment suddenly shut off. Now, he had a bird as a pet who he would keep in this large cage as he was sleeping. And as soon as the light shut off, this bird, which he says would never make any noise, this was the quietest bird he ever had in his life, but as soon as those lights shut off, this bird just starts screaming and squawking. As he describes it, it seems like this bird is in a fight for its life. Now, he's not proud of what he does next, but Once the lights shut off and the bird is going crazy, he just feels this terrible panic. And he just grabs his keys and he runs out of his front door, down the apartment building steps, out the front door, and runs straight to his car, which was parked nearby, and just sits in his car. He regrets that he didn't grab the bird and take the bird with him, but in that moment he was just filled with so much panic that he didn't know what else to do other than to just get out of there. So he's just sitting in his car. He doesn't know what to do. He can't really go anywhere because he left his phone inside. He doesn't even have shoes on. All he has is the clothes he was sleeping in and his car keys. And for about an hour, he just sits in his car. Slowly the sun starts to come up. It's not quite up over the horizon yet, but it is a little bit more visible outside, and he sees that people are starting to walk their dogs, and you have early morning joggers out, and so this makes him feel a little bit more comfortable. Things are starting to feel a little more normal, and it makes him feel like he's not quite as alone because there's people out and about on the street. So he summons his courage because he knows he's going to have to go back into the apartment, which he does. He goes through the front door of the building, he goes up the steps, and when he gets to the top of the steps, he notices that the front door of his unit is wide open. Now, he's certain that he shut it, but at the same time, he's thinking, well, I was in a panic when I ran outside. It's totally possible that I thought I shut it, but maybe I didn't. So he walks into the unit, and it is dead silent. All of the lights are back on now, but his bird is nowhere to be found. It's not in its cage. The door to the cage is shut, but the bird is not inside. He immediately begins to start panicking again, thinking that he's made a terrible mistake, that maybe his bird got out. He starts checking all of his windows. All of the windows are closed and they're locked. And he's thinking, I did leave, apparently, the door to the unit open, but the door to the building was closed. So there's no way that the bird made it out that way. He starts going from room to room, just tearing the apartment apart, looking for his pet bird. And when he gets to the bathroom, he starts to hear this splashing noise. And there's no water in the tub. And he's listening. And he can tell that this splashing noise is coming from the toilet. So he lifts up the lid to the toilet, and sure enough, in the toilet bowl, in a fight for its life, in a fight to not drown, he finds his bird. Now he just feels absolutely terrible. He feels like he let his pet down. He's supposed to protect his pet, and he left, and now his pet somehow ended up in the toilet with the lid closed. So he grabs his bird and starts to clean him off and dry him, and then puts him back in his cage, and he just goes back to the sofa and sits down and just realizes how exhausted he is. By this point, it's about 8 o'clock in the morning, and he figures that his landlord is probably awake by this point, and so he just gives her a call. And she does pick up, fortunately, and he just tells her about everything that just happened. About the dragging noises, about the whispering, about the fact that the board fell again, all of the lights shut off, the bird went crazy and somehow ended up in the toilet. And he's expecting her to either be completely shocked by this or just think he's a total nutcase. But neither of those things happen. After he finishes telling her about all of these things, he hears a brief pause, and then he hears his landlord just say, so you've heard the whispering too, huh? As it turns out, he was not the first to hear that whispering. The previous two tenants did not only experience the board falling, they experienced all of the same things that he did. Now, somehow, he does not break his lease and move away. He actually stays in this apartment for another 18 months. Before eventually moving to a different apartment in a different neighborhood. But months after he moves away, he gets a call from his old landlord. And his old landlord says to him, so I've rented the unit to a new person, and they have been calling me nonstop asking for your number because they desperately want to talk to you about some of the things that are happening in the apartment. Because it seems like the same things that he experienced were now happening again to the new tenant. A 10-year-old boy is living in a modest family home. He's an only child and he's living there with his two parents. He has a room to himself. And one night, late at night, he is awoken by the sound of his bedroom door opening. It's an old house, and old houses often have very distinct sounds when the doors open, and he knew the sound of his door opening. So he wakes up, but he doesn't open his eyes. He keeps his eyes closed. He assumes that it's his mother who's opened his door, and he doesn't really want to be bothered by his mother right now, so he keeps his eyes closed and just pretends like he's still asleep. A few moments after the door opens, he can feel the mattress at the foot of his bed start to depress, as if somebody is sitting on it. Now he's a little bit annoyed that his mother is coming in the middle of the night and waking him up and sitting on the edge of his bed, so he opens his eyes and expects to be face to face with his mother. But it's not his mother. Staring at him only feet away is another boy. Another boy that he did not recognize. The boy looked to be about his age, about 10 years old, but he had a very distinct feature that he would remember for the rest of his life. And that was that this boy did not have eyes. Where the boy should have had eyes, all he had were black, empty sockets. And this boy with no eyes is just staring directly at him. Now, you would think that the sight of this would cause him to panic, but for whatever reason, he doesn't feel any fear. More curiosity at who could this boy be at the edge of my bed, and why doesn't he have any eyes? He doesn't speak, he's just staring at this boy. And as they're staring at each other, this boy with no eyes extends his hand. And in his hand is this small wooden box. He reaches out to take this box from the boy with no eyes, and as he's doing that, the boy kind of pulls his hand back playfully. He says to this boy with no eyes in kind of an annoyed tone, "Just give me the box," not really thinking about what he's saying. And since he had just woken up from a very deep sleep, he's obviously still groggy, so for just a split second, he blinks his eyes, a fraction of a second. But when he opens his eyes back up, the boy is nowhere to be found. He's completely gone. However, looking at the foot of his bed, from the little bit of light that's coming into his room, he can see a very clear depression on the foot of his bed from where this boy was sitting only moments ago. Fast forward 5 years. The 10-year-old is now 15 years old, and he's in high school, and he has a steady girlfriend, and pretty often after school, his girlfriend would come over to his house to do homework and just hang out and that sort of thing. And that was the case on this day. After school, his girlfriend came over and they had just a little bit of homework to do. And so they complete their homework, and his girlfriend had a very long day. And so she says, "I'm going to take a quick nap until my mom comes to get me." She had only been asleep for 15 or 20 minutes when the young man hears the front door open and figures that the girlfriend's mother is now here to pick her up. So he reaches over and kind of gently shakes his girlfriend and says, "Your mom's here, it's time to get up." And his girlfriend, who's laying on her back, opens up her eyes extremely wide, as if she's seen something that is absolutely terrifying her. And she lifts up her hand and begins pointing into one of the corners of the ceiling, where the wall meets the ceiling, and just staring at this corner as if there's something there that is absolutely terrifying, and pointing at it. And the young man is looking up into the corner, and there's just absolutely nothing there. And after it was probably only a few seconds. The girlfriend closes her eyes and her hand falls back down onto the bed, and she's apparently right back to sleep. And he's thinking, what the heck was that? And now kind of shakes her a little bit harder this time and says, your mom's here. It's time to wake up. It's time to go. And this time she wakes up for real and is a little bit disoriented. And he says to her, what just happened? Only a few seconds ago, I shook you awake and your eyes went huge, like something was terrifying you, and you started pointing up to that corner of my room. And she says, wait, that was real? I thought that was a dream. I was having this dream that I was in your room and I was laying on your bed, and I opened up my eyes, and up in that corner of your room, there was this boy on the ceiling. He was kind of tucked into the corner, almost doing like a Spider-Man pose, and he was just staring at me, but it was really weird because he didn't have any eyes. Where his eyes were supposed to be, he just had these black sockets. Now, his heart kind of sinks a little bit hearing this, because he hadn't thought about that boy in a long time. Aside from that one night, he had never seen him again. And so his girlfriend telling him what she just saw confirms to him that this experience that he thought was nothing more than a weird dream was actually real. Fast forward an additional 5 years. Both him and his girlfriend are still together. They're 20 years old. They've finished high school. They both have jobs. And they also have a 2-year-old daughter. In order to save money, once they finish high school, they moved back into the young man's parents' house and all moved into his bedroom. So it was him, his girlfriend, and now their daughter were all splitting this room. So obviously, quarters were a little bit cramped. About the time that his daughter was 2 years old, she started to have these episodes in the middle of the night where it was clear that she was having some kind of conversation with something. Now, she was 2, so what she was saying was pretty indecipherable, but it would seem as though she was carrying on a conversation with something. And the conversation always seemed to be kind of the same every night. It seemed like she was saying the same sort of things, and what she was saying had the same cadence every night, even if they couldn't really distinguish what it was that she was saying. And this went on for quite a while. Eventually, the young man just had to know. So one day during breakfast, he very playfully, in order to not scare her, asks his daughter, who is it that you're talking to at night? And she says to him, well, it's the little boy. He's nice, but he's lost and he's looking for his mommy. Now, he doesn't push the issue and ask her about the eyes, but it was clear to him that he had this experience with this boy when he was 10. His girlfriend did when they were both 15. Now, 5 years after that, his daughter is when she's 2. A man is living in a medium-sized city in the United States. He has a very well-paying job, so he's able to afford this big loft right in the downtown area, kind of in the entertainment district of his city. Now, where his building was kind of surrounded by bars. Basically, you would have businesses on either side, and then there would be this sort of nondescript door smack between these businesses, and you would go in the door and go up some stairs, and that's how you would get into his building. He was always worried that because the door to his building was right between 2 bars, that at some point, maybe somebody who's had too much to drink could accidentally wander into his building, thinking that it's another bar. But something even stranger than that happened to him one night in late October. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, and he's awoken from a deep sleep by a strange sound. It sounds like there's something out in his living room. And his first thought is, oh great, some drunk person has wandered in off the street and somehow made it into my apartment. And he's listening, And it sounds like there are the very distinct voices of two different men. And it sounds like they're just sitting in his living room carrying on a conversation as if nothing is unusual about this. Now, he did have two male friends that had keys to his apartment because sometimes they would be out downtown and it was just easier for them to crash on his couch than it was for them to get a taxi all the way to the other side of town. But he's listening very carefully, and these voices are very distinct. He's hearing them very clearly, and these are not his friends. He does not at all recognize these two voices that he's hearing. And so as carefully as he can, he gets out of his bed and he starts getting closer to his bedroom door and sort of putting his ear up to the door and trying to listen as best as he can. Just as he's putting his ear up to the door, he hears this awful noise. It sounded like violins screeching and things crashing. It was just a terrible, terrifying noise. And as soon as he hears that noise, he sort of jumps back because he's so surprised and startled by it, and he crashes into a piece of furniture. And when he crashes into the piece of furniture, obviously that makes a lot of noise. And he's thinking, oh great, now I've just tipped off whoever this is to the fact that I'm in here. Maybe before they thought that this apartment was empty or something. So he's trying to recover and he's trying to listen. He's also trying to calm himself down. But now, suddenly, after he's crashed into this piece of furniture, he doesn't hear anything anymore. Which to him is even scarier. Because if they're not in the living room, I did not hear the door open for them to leave. Where are they? Are they standing right on the other side of my bedroom door, just waiting to ambush me? He makes a plan that he's going to grab something that he can use as a weapon, and he is just going to burst out there and be as scary and as intimidating as he can be and maybe scare these people off. Hopefully it ends well. So he grabs an object, something that he can use as a weapon, and does exactly that. He bursts out of his bedroom door, ready to fight, ready to go. But he's looking around. The apartment is completely empty. It's completely still. Nothing seems out of place. He's looking around to see if maybe anything was stolen, but everything is exactly how he left it. He checks the door, and it's still locked. The door was never unlocked. So now he's convinced that something paranormal has happened. He has no other explanation for it, and obviously does not sleep very well the rest of the night. The next morning, he's leaving his apartment to go to work, extremely tired, completely exhausted because he hadn't slept well after that, and he runs into his downstairs neighbor. And his neighbor says to him, "Hey, I'm sorry about last night." What are you talking about? Well, you know I'm a video editor, and I was making a video for a submission to a Halloween contest. It's basically editing these spooky videos together and stuff. And I accidentally connected to your speakers using Bluetooth, and I'm pretty sure it made a loud noise in your apartment. So sorry about that. Turns out there was no intruder. It was nothing more than his downstairs neighbor who was editing a scary video for a Halloween project. Thanks for watching. If you happen to enjoy spooky stories that are told to you by an awkward man in his 30s, then I'm the channel for you. So why not stick around and subscribe, maybe even like the video. I appreciate you watching. Thanks.